Okay, well, let's dive into the real meat and potatoes here. We're going to be talking about switching gears, of course, cargo theft. And the folks at Travelers were so thankful enough to come join us and talk about it. So let's welcome on our guest here. We're going to be welcoming Scott Cornell, VP of Transportation at Travelers. Scott is a longtime guest for What the Truck. And Scott, it's an absolute pleasure to have you back on.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks for having me.
And so let's dive into this because it's very, very exciting. But cargo theft has really become a hot topic for those of us in the industry. And so, looking at some data between 2022 and 2024, cargo theft is up over 93%. But this is where it gets interesting. One type of theft has skyrocketed even more. That is strategic theft. So, we had you back on earlier in May to talk about it, but let's dive back into it because it looks like things are getting pretty real out there.
Yeah, the CargoNet data shows us, as you mentioned, that the cargo theft as a whole in that time period is up over 90, I think it's about 93% dead on. But strategic theft in particular, which is the most difficult, the most complex type of cargo theft for the industry to deal with, is up 1,475%, something like that. So almost 1,500%, right? So that is where, strategic theft is when there's trickery involved, deception. They're not physically there. They're usually doing it remote. They're doing it virtually. And that's really hit the industry pretty hard. Um, but,
Yeah.
I think what's happening is a lot of people are seeing that big increase in strategic theft, and they're forgetting about straight theft.
And let's talk about the difference between strategic and straight theft. I am more familiar with straight theft from my trucking days, where you use bolt cutters, break a seal, kind of like a dine and dash where you're getting in there and getting out real quick. So let's talk a little about more about the straight theft part now. Run us through some of the scenarios.
Yeah, so straight theft, I've said it on this show many times. Cargo at rest is cargo at risk. It really speaks to when the freight is sitting still, tends to be truck stops, drop lots, parking lots, you name it. Pilferage is a big part of that. So when you ask about the difference between the two, again, strategic theft tends to be done virtually, remotely, phones, email phishing, emails, social engineering emails, any kind of trickery that can get the freight in their hands. Straight theft is labeled straight theft because it's pretty straightforward. They're physically there stealing it. They're at the location stealing it. Pilferage is a prime example of that. I always say pilferage is the iceberg below the water when it comes to cargo theft because it's the least reported, but it's one of the most frequent, if not the most frequent method. And it's just like you said, they're cutting the bolt seals, they're breaking into the rear of the trailer, and in a lot of cases, if we stick with pilferage as an example, they're taking a few boxes, they're taking a pallet, they're taking two pallets, things like that. So they're not taking the tractor and the trailer. We still see plenty of that across the country. The industry sees plenty of that across the country where they take the entire tractor and trailer. But pilferage in particular, they're just getting into the trailer and taking part of the load.
And looking at the location, because it looks like from my days doing HVP freight, there were certain clusters and areas that we considered no zones in terms of making sure you have to go within a 200-mile radius, don't stop because of these threats. Let's talk about here in terms of straight theft. Are there any specific areas that folks should become aware of as we're getting this massive increase in data since 2022?
Yeah, so straight theft, when we talked about the increase in strategic theft, so that's gone from about 5% to maybe 33% of all cargo theft, but the straight theft still represents about 67% of all straight theft. And where we've really seen some of those hotspots, there's the traditional ones, Southern California, Houston, Dallas, Florida, all the places that are either around ports, Chicago, Memphis, or what we would consider inland ports because of the massive rail yards. But in particular, if we want to use a good example, the Arizona border of California has really become a hotspot for pilferage and follow crews over the past, let's say, 3 or 4 years. In particular, one of the reasons is drivers coming out of California, whether it's with food and beverage or high-end electronics, are trying to make it across that Arizona border and into Arizona because fuel is so much cheaper. So they wait until they get to Arizona for that first stop, and a lot of those follow crews know that, and they'll either follow them there or they'll actually put uh, parts of their crew there waiting for those trucks to arrive, and they'll communicate ahead that, hey, this truck left this warehouse, this distribution center, things like that, and those trucks will get targeted.
So it's kind of like targeting the watering hole almost, where you've got a situation where these drivers
That's a
think
good
they're
analogy. Yeah.
yeah, it's predatory. It's predatory. So let's talk about
Yeah.
what happens with that. How do you stop it? Don't they have like surveillance cameras or something?
Well, yeah, the old camera question, right? So, 30 years of doing this roughly, and I can tell you that, first of all, cameras for the most part don't stop crime, right? This type of crime. Let's stick with cargo theft. For the most part, cameras don't really stop cargo crime. A lot of the cargo crews know that there's cameras around, things like that. In fact, a lot of the truck stops may not even have cameras. That's not a criticism. They just may not. And a lot of the drivers aren't, if the parking's full, you're not necessarily parked in the truck stop anyway. You're outside the truck stop. There's actually more incidents of cases where the in-dash cameras, the outward-facing cameras from another truck catch the theft in progress than there is, a stationary camera, things like that. So we've seen investigators pull that type of video. But, we call those kind of popcorn reels. Get ready to watch the stuff get stolen. It's not really going to lead. Sometimes, they will put a fake license plate on the outside of the license plate. The vans that they use for these, or the box truck they use for these, are pretty, plain. They're just white trucks, white vans, white box trucks, or just, one solid color. There's not a lot of identifying marks on them. So if you're not picking any of that up from the video cameras, you're probably not going to get anywhere with that video.
So let's talk a little bit about preventative steps then, because it definitely feels like, given the situation and the stuff's being stolen from right under their noses, how do we work on preventing it? So when we're talking about that, what should companies and drivers be doing right now? And then we'll dive into some extra layers.
So we work with our clients on a layered basis when we teach them prevention, and there's three layers that we really work on. That first layer is good process and procedures, and a big part of that is educating your drivers. We've always said, I've said it very openly, I think the drivers are your best first line of defense. An educated driver, a driver who is made aware of, hey, you're hauling high-end electronics out of Southern California, and that hot spot right there at that Arizona border, that's a really bad spot. Can you go a little bit further? Or could you stop ahead of time? Can you give them some fuel incentives that would make them, able to maybe go just a little bit farther, or a little bit shorter? But even just making them aware, even if they have to stop there, making them aware, hey, this is a real hot spot. Here's what's been going on there, and you're hauling that type of freight. That's a big deal, and drivers will tend to look for opportunities. Maybe they can back the trailer up against something so that the doors can't be opened, or they'll just be more aware on it. If you can't do that, you can get into high security rear door locks. And, can they cut through these things? Sure, but you're trying to make life difficult for them. And a lot of times, I'll suggest to my clients, take those high security rear door locks, put them on at the loading dock. So you're putting them way up high. So now you're just making life difficult for the bad guys. And then that those hard locking devices, air cuff locks, landing gear locks, high security rear door locks, that's the second layer, right? That's the second part of that three-layer process. And then technology comes into play later on.
I
Hopefully
like the
tracking,
layered
things
with
like that.
with the locks, because that was a crazy thing that blew my mind, was that a lot of these things are plastic seals and you have the door closed and you wrap a little seal around it, and like for the longest time before fraudsters caught note, that's kind of how we hauled things. And so even though a lot of these locks are not impervious, you brought up such a great point, make it so difficult that they have to make noise and they have to work for it, and then hopefully that brings the attention and the alarm, so then you can be like, hey, I'm gonna, get away from my truck.
Exactly right. And you're just trying to make life very difficult for them. Be a harder target, right? You don't want to be a soft target. And, I'm asked sometimes, don't the drivers hear this? Don't the drivers know that somebody's in the back of at the back of the trailer trying to break into the trailer? No, these drivers have become accustomed to sleeping with the truck running. You have the noise of the truck, you have the noise of the truck stop. They're very accustomed to this. And it's not like these, when they're cutting the bolt seals and getting into the door, it's not like they're really rocking the truck, so to speak, or rocking the trailer. Have there been incidents of drivers finding it or realizing that it's going on? Sure, but I don't think people realize how accustomed that a lot of the drivers have become to sleeping with all that noise, sleeping with all that movement, trucks driving by, shaking their truck and their trailer. This is their life day in and day out, so they become very accustomed to that. And when you talk about the seals, seal locks are very important. So you can secure those rear doors, but if you're hauling something that's perishable or temp controlled or something like that, you need to protect the seal too. So seal locks are important as well.
That's one of the things that really operationally brings up is making sure that drivers are putting seal numbers, bill of lading numbers in their checking. Because I can imagine a situation where, for some of these drivers, alluding to your first point, which is education, as we're doing this multi layered approach, go outside and check the seal. Because if I'm a fraudster and I know you just have a plastic seal, I can buy them at the truck stop. So, what would stop me from
Yeah.
stealing your stuff and then resealing it with a different number? And then Thomas is just busy. He's in a hurry. He does a quick pre trep. He's like, it's a seal. And then nobody finds out until hundreds of miles later.
Yeah, you make a great point. They've gotten very good at doing that, right? They understand that the driver may be well aware that they have a yellow seal on the back. So when they cut that seal, they put the seal in their pocket. They don't throw it on the ground. A lot of the old crews, the old time crews, they used to just cut that seal, throw it on the ground, and the driver would see it and report it. But they cut that seal, they put it in their pocket, they take what they're going to take, and then they put another yellow seal on there. So the driver comes out, sees the yellow seal, everything's fine. They make their run. They get to the state. They get 5, 6 states away to make the delivery, and the rear doors are open, and all of a sudden everybody realizes there's 2 pallets gone. Well, the problem is, where do you report that? You're not even sure where it happened. So now, who do you report that to? How do you report that? Who's going to take a report on that? Do you even have any idea where it could have happened? It really confuses things. It really makes for a more difficult situation.
I wanted to ask about the reporting one, then I wanted to get a forward looking idea with technology. When that happens, it's been explained to me, and trucking associations have told me once cargo theft occurs, it becomes so difficult because there's so many different agencies. My truck may be in another state, and then sometimes the agencies say, well, we don't want to handle it. It's a civil matter. Is that one of the other layers when we're talking about it? Is having a system in place that if the event it does happen, we at least know in each kind of area who we really need to contact, because I hear that that's a huge roadblock as everyone throws their hands up in the air and they say, ask like Homeland Security or something.
Yeah, so reporting generally, so if we're talking about, let's go back, we'll talk quickly about strategic theft. Strategic theft, you're going to want to report it to the law enforcement agency where the load was taken control of. So if they use identity theft or fictitious pickup or a double brokering scam or something like that, the location where the freight was taken control of by that group that sent somebody to pick it up for you, that's where you're going to want to report it. With pilferage, we're talking about pilferage here. That's very difficult. If you left California and you're headed to Texas and you stop 5, 6, 7 times along the way and you can't tell law enforcement exactly where it happened, it's not likely that law enforcement's going to give you a report without you being able to give them specifics and for sure knowing that it happened in their jurisdiction. And you can't fault them for that because that's time, man hours, things like that would come with taking in that report, trying to investigate something. The other difficulty is, what if it's perishable goods? So if you have 2 pallets of frozen meat stolen, even if it's recovered, what's going to happen to it? So you get into all sorts of difficulties around reporting. Now, if you do know where it took place, local law enforcement is going to take that report for you. What you need to be aware of is, let's say California as an example, local law enforcement takes the report for you. You also need to be aware that CTIPS, the California Highway Patrol, has a cargo theft task force. So once you get that local report from that local police department, you want to get that police report up to that task force, because that task force is going to take over that cargo investigation. And that happens in several of the states like Florida. Um, uh, Memphis area has a task force. Different parts of the country where they have those task forces, you're going to want to make sure that your local police report gets up to those task forces.
I really like that. That's some really helpful info for me as well. Strategic theft, call the law enforcement when it happens. Say it picks up in Nashville, report it in Nashville. But when it happens like pilferage, where you could went from Nashville to California and let's say Arizona, then we got to call Arizona, but we need to provide the details, and then you see if the agency has something else. So it's a two-pronged approach. Final thoughts with technology and hardware. I talked to telematics providers. We have tons of front facing cameras, and you mentioned them earlier in the interview. Are you recommending yet, or is the technology there yet to have inside the trailer cameras? So then at least I can see if it's been open and closing. Has that been something folks are using to fight fraud? Or are we kind of still in the early stages to where we're working out the kinks and then eventually it may be a valuable toolkit in a fraud fighting toolbox?
Yeah, I think the industry as a whole is making some pretty good advancements on the technology part. Now, cameras inside the trailer, they are available. That technology's been around for a while. Actually, Travelers has a Sting trailer that we use, that we loan out to law enforcement across the country, that has had cameras that face out from the trailer and down to see who's opening the door and things like that. And so that technology's been around. We're starting to see some carriers out there and freight brokers that specialize in the secure movement of freight because they're responding to these big increases in cargo theft. So we're seeing some trailers purposely modified for that because of exactly what you're saying, wanting to prevent that type of theft or at least be able to document it. But there's also other technology out there. There's Bluetooth locks that will lock the door from the inside, that make it much harder for the bad guys to cut any kind of a lock because there's no external lock. It's inside the trailer doors. We're seeing there are some companies out there that have designed trailers that are almost, the rear doors are almost like safes. They have steel rods that go across so you can't get into the back of it. Tracking's come a long way. The thing about tracking, the bad guys are very aware of tracking, so a lot of times they'll thwart the tracking, they'll fool the tracking. They have a device that's called the sniffer that will tell them if there's tracking in the load sometimes. So you really have to use a lot of redundancy when it comes to tracking, meaning you want there to be tracking in the cargo. Ultimately, you're trying to get the cargo back, right? Tracking in the trailer is great, but if I find you your empty trailer, are you going to be happy, or do you need the $500,000 of electronics that was in it, right? So tracking both in the trailer and in the cargo itself is really good. So there's a lot of advances out there in technology. People should really take an eye. We have an innovation page, the Travelers Transportation innovation page, where we bring a lot of these vendors to our clients that they can go on and click. And that's open to the public. People can go to that page and take a look at some of that as well.
Well, Scott, thank you so much for hopping on the show again. This was some amazing info. In addition to the innovation stuff that you all have for folks to check out, if folks want to learn more about Travelers as well, what's the best way to get more information?
Travelers.com/transportation.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Scott. We'll definitely catch up again soon.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.